is.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, well, Anna Lael will be telling us about Cooke Creek River Mile 4.25 and River Mile 3.86 passage and screening. And so I'm excited to hear about this. This is right by my house. I always enjoy those.
Okay, I'm gonna stay back here if everybody's okay with that, so I'm getting closer to
Oh, do you want me to advance it for you?
yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. What were you saying?
This is Michael said, I'm Anna Lael. I'm the district manager for the Kittitas County Conservation District. And this is Cooke Creek, River Mile 4.25 and 3.86 in Kittitas County. So we go next slide, please.
It's similar.
There we go. So this is just a general map showing the area of the project. So in the Kittitas Valley, this project is just on the southwest kind of boundary of the city of Kittitas, which is about 7 miles east of Ellensburg. The shaded areas there are, so this is 2 irrigation diversions. So the shaded, 2 yellow shaded areas there are the lands associated with those irrigation diversions. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So just fish use in Cooke Creek, our focus is summer steelhead, of course, but also Cooke Creek has coho, chinook, and then a whole suite of resident fishes that we didn't list out there. Coho spawning has actually been seen in the lower couple of miles of Cooke Creek, although it's been a few years ago. I don't know that there's been recent sightings there as well. Go ahead to the next slide. So our goals and objectives, and I noticed after I made some corrections and had Michael upload this one that there's corrections here as well. So I mentioned passage in both of the top bullets there, but essentially our goal is to screen unscreened irrigation diversions and to correct the fish passage barriers that are created by those irrigation diversions on Cooke Creek. The lower bullet that is grayed out there, and we have this listed in the application and maybe some feedback, maybe from Elizabeth or others on how exactly we want to mention this in here. We're not asking for any funding for the riparian enhancement work. We're intending to do that with other funding. We had gone back and forth in the application process about whether or not we had enough room in the budget to do that, and we do not have enough room in the budget to do that if we're going to address the screening and passage. So we are intending to work with the landowners in that whole reach to work on planning riparian buffers and then going after other funding to actually do it. So I put it up there, but I grayed it out. So next slide. So our partners, and just in listening to all of the introductions and the folks that are kind of new to this process, maybe don't know who the Yakima Tributary Access and Habitat Program is and what we have done. So just briefly, it's YTAP is what we call it. YTAP started in the early 2000s after the listing of Mid-Columbia steelhead. The Bureau worked on phase 1 and phase 2 fish screen projects in kind of the main stem and the bigger tributaries. There's this effort to work on the smaller tributaries, individual diversions. And originally we actually were hoping that the Bureau would call it this phase 3, but it did not turn out that way. And it's, I think, for the best. Instead, it's the Yakima Tributary Access and Habitat Program, which is funded primarily by Bonneville Power. That funding goes to the Washington RC&D and then is subcontracted out to Kittitas County Conservation District, North Yakima Conservation District, and WDFW has a staff person who provides us permitting support on our projects. And so that's basically YTAP. And then other partners on this project, because the upstream landowner has applied for cost share money to do conversion to sprinklers on farm. There is money through the Washington State Conservation Commission and the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service for, I'm sorry, this is just acronyms galore, but RCPP, which is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It's a big program that NRCS rolled out a few years ago. We had one in cooperation with the Yakima Nation. Yakima Nation's actually was the lead on that one, 2017 to 2022, which is now done. We have a new one that just started in our first sign up, and this is one of our applications in that first sign up. And so there's funding there as well. NRCS, while they have technical resources, they are not much technical help on these projects. they have capacity issues. And so we primarily are using them for their money, for the gosh share money. I know that sounds terrible, but that's, we put together the RCPP, there are contributions that come in. We're looking to them for especially the on-farm money, and then we're trying to fill in all of the gaps around that to make a whole project. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this map, we haven't actually put in a surf board application here in a little bit, and I know past discussions have always been, there's always been this discussion about sequencing of projects. So this map just shows, and these are almost exclusively YTAP projects that have been completed in this watershed. So Cooke Creek is a tributary to Cherry Creek, which is a tributary to Wilson Creek. Right at the Thrall interchange is where Wilson and Cherry Creek come together, and then of course Wilson Creek drops into the Yakima right at the mouth of the Yakima Canyon. So we have been working more or less upstream on all of these tributaries, and most of these projects, green dots on there, are irrigation diversions that were screened and made passable, were consolidated, and so some were removed because there were sprinkler conversions or other things that have been done over the last, and YTAP's been around 20 years now, so I've been working on it a long time. So I say that about sequencing, but so the stars up there are sort of related to our project. The two red stars on kind of the yellow shading there, those are the two irrigation diversions that we're working on. Downstream of it is a yellow star. That is a partial barrier, which is the county bridge over, the Fairview Road Bridge over Cooke Creek. It is 67% passable. It's a velocity issue. I don't know quite where it is in the county list of bridges to be replaced. It's probably not super high because Fairview is not, it dead ends at the freeway. So it's not like it's a high priority then, but that is there. Downstream of it are those two green dots that are real close together. And that was the very first tap project that was done in the early 2000s, completely out of sequence with everything else that we're now, 20 years later, finally working upstream of that. It was a situation where Ellensburg Water Company was ready to go with the project. There was funding through BPA. BPA directly contracted with the contractor. None of that money actually went through us at that point because it was early in the process. But it was a correction of the Ellensburg Water Company intersection with Cooke Creek. So now the creek is daylighted there, and there's a fish screen and a passage barrier, or a fish ladder to address the passage barrier there. You go upstream from the two red stars that are our project sites, you see a yellow star and then another red star. So that gets us into the city of Kittitas. There are small bridges, but none of them appear to be passage barriers until you get to Patrick Avenue, which is actually the same as the Kittitas Highway and Clerf Road on either side. It's the connection to that. And there's a culvert there, and we're not sure if that's a passage barrier at this point. It has not been assessed, and it's something that we need to look at. And then the red star is Cascade Canal intersection, and it is definitely a barrier. There is no barrier assessment that's needed to be done other than just to document that it actually is. So when we calculated the stream miles opened up by correcting the two barriers for our project, we only went to the Patrick Avenue, to the yellow star. We didn't go all the way up to Cascade with that calculation. So it's about 3/4 of a mile that would be opened up with the two projects that we're looking at. Then go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is zoomed in a little bit. So these diversions we actually talked about last year or the year before for the Fish Barrier Removal Board. Last year? I can't remember. We've talked about them on and off. These projects have kind of been out there. One of the reasons we didn't really pursue it is because the landowner wasn't, we didn't have funding. The landowner wasn't ready yet to do a sprinkler conversion. Well, in that time, they have now applied for this funding through our RCPP project, definitely on board for wanting to convert to sprinklers. And so it is an opportunity for that upper diversion to, and our hope is that what will work there is a pump diversion. So the whole structure comes out. We put in a pump station in a screen in the creek, and so then there's no passage issue related to it. We thought that the lower diversion, initially when we started this application, we thought that we can consolidate it up to that upper diversion and like put them all together and pipe it back down. But as it turns out, that lower diversion actually has head gates on both sides of the creek, and so it makes it a little bit more complicated. And so where we are now is we're addressing them separately, because there's also the issue of moving that diversion upstream means that you're taking water out, you know, in an additional reach, water that would have been in that reach and diverted at that lower diversion. These are not creek water rights that are being diverted here. This is Cascade Canal Company water that is being spilled into the creek and picked up by these diversions. So while we're doing sprinkler conversions and talking about all of that, there's no opportunity for like an in-stream flow, a trust water application, because it's not, the landowner doesn't have control over that. It's what's spilled into the creek by Cascade Canal. And then the lower diversion is a relatively small diversion capacity wise. And like we said, there are head gates on either side of the creek there that serve some part of all of those yellow parcels down there, but not all of them. Some of them also have access from water that comes down Fairview Road that's also delivered from Cascade. But there are some pieces of it back there that the only place to get their water is what's transferred down the creek to them. Okay, go ahead to the next one. This is the lower diversion. It's ugly. I think we thought in the early goings before really went out and took a really good look at this when the flows were higher. We did think that there was only water being diverted on the right bank, but it was clear out there that there's also water diverted on the left bank. It's a much lower profile than the upper diversion, which hopefully will make our hopeful design work a little bit better. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, it's ugly.
It's got character.
Yeah, it does. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, so Cassandra Weeks is our YTAP person at WDFW, and she and Sherry on my staff went out and took these photos and you know, did a pretty good run through of what we're looking at there. You can see the flows were pretty substantial at that point. This is high for Cooke Creek. It can get very low in the summertime. But it has come up from this level in the last few days. It's been, all the creeks have been rocking in the valley here the last few days. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is the upper diversion. And one of the things I want to point out is those trees are crack willow and they are awful. They make it super hard for us to get any good pictures of the structure because there's so much there and they make such a mess. So it'll be easier to see in person for sure. Go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, on the downstream end of it. So definitely a fish passage barrier. This one's got a pretty, yeah, it's checked up pretty far. And it's ugly. So it is that one you saw head gates on either side, which is irrigating lands on either side that right now are being irrigated with a gated pipe system, so a surface system that would be, I think there's a total of 109 acres on either side that would be converted to sprinklers. They have their sprinkler plan together with the vendor, and so they're working on that piece of it, and then we're working on hopefully helping them with this in-stream part of it. Go ahead to the next slide. So these are just some examples of projects that we did that we hope would be similar. This is actually, the sprinkler does not actually go with this, but there is a sprinkler associated with the fish screen project. So that is a pump station in actually in Nanum Creek with a river screen. So the river screen sits up on those pontoons. The benefit of the river screen is you need less water depth than you would need with pump right or other kind of screen that you need to have a certain amount of coverage over it. So hopeful that we can make a river screen work at this site. We don't know until we go through the design process if we really can make that work. We have had situations like this where the landowner actually has two different screens. They have a pump right screen for when the flows are high because the flows when they're high can be kind of turbulent, and that's an issue for the river screen on those pontoons. It causes some issues. So they're able to swap out the type of fish screen they use based on the actual creek flows. that they're dealing with. Go ahead to the next slide. And then I didn't have any good pictures, so that the lower diversion, we really feel like we can use WDFW screenshot modular screens because they're like 1 CFS diversions on either side. So those fit well into the modular screens. It's a much lower profile. So we think we can do in-stream work. So there wouldn't need to be checkboards or anything to kind of make that all work. So this is just, this was the photo I could find of a WDFW modular fish screening. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then the in-stream work would be sort of similar to this. This is that Nanum Creek project. So a rock, whatever you want to call it, a rock chute, a rock channel. I don't even know the appropriate. I don't know, Jen, if you know that. I don't know. Rock chute is what I have been saying lately because it seems like it fits the best. So it would be obviously designed in order to meet the water surface elevations that are needed at both sites to be able to maintain the pump diversion, you know, so that they can actually divert. And then also at the lower diversion, so that those gravity head gates could continue to work. And that would require probably working up onto the upper landowner from the lower landowner in order to make sure that we get the gravity flow to continue to work on that site. Go ahead to the next slide. So costs, and these are just the construction costs. The two, I guess I said rough and channels here, so rock chute, rough and channel, but whatever terminology you want to use. Those corrections at those two sites, just a little under 200,000. And then the fish screens, so river screen or pump right, or river screen and pump right screen at the upper diversion, and then modular screens at the lower diversion for about 216,000. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is the cost estimate. You can see we are asking for $349,999. And the reason we're at that level is because if we go over 350, we have to have a design, and we're not there yet. So, so we're asking for just construction money. We have some project match in there, but that's mostly match for the construction piece of it. The funding not reported in PRISM, the 78,000 is mostly design money that would come through YTAP, which we've already added this project to the scope of the current scope of work, or we're working on adding it. And then the Washington State Conservation Commission, and the commission's involvement with RCPP is they're a big chunk of our contribution for that project that's required by NRCS. And so we use the commission money for those pieces that, again, NRCS is either doesn't have the capacity for or is not good at necessarily. So there's that. What is not even included in the funding not reported, because I didn't include the on-farm irrigation systems, is the estimated payment from NRCS to the upper producers, about 215,000 for the sprinkler systems, and then they would have their share of it. I can't say that it's a percentage of it because NRCS pays a payment rate. They don't pay a percentage of the total cost. So I would guess that the landowner is probably putting in, well, I don't even want to guess. I don't want to get that far wrong. Yeah, so go ahead to the next slide. And then just lastly, really quickly, relationship to other programs. So voluntary stewardship program, I don't know if you guys have all heard of that. It addresses ag practices in critical areas under the Growth Management Act. And so we have a VSP program, of course, in our county, working with agricultural producers to address the issues with critical areas, including streams, and also working to maintain agricultural viability. So that's the piece of working on helping them upgrade their on-farm system, and then working on the in-stream component of it to provide screening and passage. And then the other piece of it is the Washington State Conservation Commission, as Alex mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. There is in the budget, as long as the governor doesn't do anything with it, which who knows, I guess it's not done yet. But 25 million to RCO and 25 million to the Washington State Conservation Commission for riparian plantings. And so that is the source of money that we would use. And or there's some VSP project money, capital money that is also in the commission budget right now for about $3 million for the biennium. That of course is available to all the counties in the state, or all the VSP counties in the state. And that is another source of funding for the riparian component that we talked about earlier. I think that's it. Yep, so questions. So I do have to say, Sherry Swanson on my staff is one who's been working with the landowner, and she is also the one that manages the Menashtash diversions, and the creek has been high and she has been crazy busy. So I don't think that she's online, so I will do the best I can to answer questions pertinent to the landowner and what's happening, but I may need to follow up with her depending on the questions.
Thank you. Any questions in the room or online?
Okay.
Hey, maybe I missed it, but you're requesting money for construction. Do you have designs already? Or what was the 350,000 need designs?
So we are working on the designs through YTAP and our other funding. So that's some of the funding not reported in PRISM total that I had on the page there. So no, we do not have designs yet. What I am presenting is what has been the typical solution. If we can have a typical solution to these kind of projects, but no, we do not have designs.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have the proposed sprinkler layout?
Yes.
For those at first, if you could include that, that would be great.
Okay, I'm gonna need to ask the landowner, make sure they're comfortable with that, since it's not included in the, we're not asking for this money.
Right. Well, as you know, sometimes they get closer to the stream than they currently do. So that's, I guess, my concern is,
Okay.
will there be room for riparian, or are we bringing that pivot arm right up to the
And
edge?
I can't remember exactly what it looks like. I don't think so. I think it's I wanna say it's a full circle on the west side of the creek. And then the other side of the creek, the city of Kittitas sewer treatment plant is there between the land and, so it would just be the west side. I'll look at it.
Yeah, thanks.
There's trees in the way.
There's a lot of crack willow there.
Ugly trees.
Yeah.
Are all the passage barriers from the Yakima River up to your project point cleared out now?
So yes, with the exception of that one at Fairview Road, that is 67% passable, so mostly passable, but not completely.
And then maybe Mike and Elizabeth have already worked through this, but for meeting the design criteria for asking for over 250 or
350. It's 350.
That's right, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, I checked.
Yeah, this was a recent policy change of that threshold.
Yeah.
I just want to read a comment from Elizabeth. I believe the intention of the 350K limit is to determine the level of complication involved in a construction project. Field fit projects need basis of design report, see Appendix D, Manual 18. The review panel will likely need enough details on the proposed construction to judge the technical merits of the project. Might want to add a work site for the riparian restoration planning and implementation, as there could be salmon riparian funding available this year and next to supplement the surfboard funding. We could amend it into the project. RCO doesn't yet have a plan for how it will be deployed, but I hope to learn more soon. Work sites make it easy to track different implementation components of the project and help clarify partial funding needs for different elements of the proposal. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
It does sound like, even though the threshold's up based on what Elizabeth just said, that confirming that you'll be far enough in design to make the review panel not balk.
Okay.
Will be still needed. And for newcomers, the state review panel, we review projects, we rank them. They have the ability basically to ask us to kick out projects if they don't think they don't meet technical muster. They can't tell us this is a higher or lower priority. We disagree with your ranking of how important it is in Yakima, but they can say from a design and technical perspective, we think this one's a dud. We're not willing to say the state should fund it.
And maybe since Sherry's been talking with the lower diversion, but there's a lot of different little landowners there. Have we looked into opportunity for maybe something beyond just screening and passage? I don't know if they had, well, like enhanced riparian through there or.
So that is the
inset
intent of that
floodplain
one,
or something along those lines.
because the creek actually only goes through just the upper, kind of upper portion of that lower block. The rest of them are all below the creek, and so they don't have creek frontage. So yes, that is the intent, is that group from, well, it's Kathy is the landowner where the lower diversion is, all the way down to Fairview Road would be who we would be.
Okay.
I hate to use word targeting, but
Yeah.
yeah, focusing on.
What's the condition of the substrate in Cooke Creek? I mean, is there suitable spawning gravels, or are they all bound up in crack willow mats?
I don't know if I can answer that question there. I know if you look on that aerial photo of it, the crack willow on that between these two diversions is pretty significant. I don't know if anybody's looked at.
I was in one of those lower parcels years ago, and it was pretty nice. I was surprised at the substrate. It
Is that when we went to Olmsted Park, or?
No,
That's on Coleman.
yeah. This was just a HPA visit that I had.
I'm just wondering what we're providing access to. Is it?
Well, that's a good question. It's a fair question, I think. You should answer that.
I would have to have somebody go look at it and know.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be a fish biologist or know part of it.
But in the past, we've had conversations about how far are we gonna go in Cooke? And the city was
This is
kind of it
Yeah.
for the early phases.
So we are working with Cascade Canal on, they have several intersections. This is not yet a priority intersection for them. We are looking at, it's through NRCS, so who knows what it's gonna actually be, but they have their PL 566 program where we could potentially get a significant chunk of federal money to come in and help Cascade. So they have some lining projects, they have their pumps at the river, and then they have all of these intersections with the creeks. So we've been working on design on Courier, we'll be starting on Nanum. Cascade at Coleman is funded through the Fish Barrier Removal Board. So then Cooke Creek would be the next one down, and we haven't even touched that one yet. So it would be a while into the future before we could address that one. I think one of the things about Cooke Creek that maybe makes it a little bit easier is I know that Cascade does not have a water right out of Cooke Creek. I think that's one of the reasons we haven't looked at it. We were focusing on the ones where they did have water rights. So you have screening and passage to deal with, not just passage. Yeah.
But at least based on our discussions for the prioritization strategy we've used for the Fish Barrier Board, Cooke Creek has less flow and likely less habitat upstream than either Coleman or Caribou on either side of it. And so part of the reason that there's been more priority on getting past Cascade in the midterm. That's an ever evolving discussion, and it'll soon be FBRB solicitation time again this fall. Have you got notice they're funding Nanum, I assume?
I've not gotten any.
But I don't think that money gets down to any other.
Any other questions? We have about 3 minutes left before we move on to Gold Creek.
The thing that's always a surprise is seeing the updated maps, and when I was hired, people talk about getting to town ditch is a long way off. If we get there, we'll continue to Cascade, but then we're gonna have to ask lots of questions, and all of a sudden, we're having those discussions about being at Cascade, and where do we go next?